Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
Hey, here we go again. Some more Civil War battles for really nothing now, because we got inconsequential battle here in Fort Blakeley. If you guys remember the Spanish Fort battle that we had about a month and a half ago now at this point. That's the second part of that, really. And then we have the Battle of Morrisville, which is technically the last battle between Sherman and Johnston. And then we'll get into Johnston's surrender, since that didn't happen at a battle. That happened 2 weeks after this battle, so might as well get into that. And then we'll have the Battle of West Point, which is literally a nothing battle. And that's going to be on the same day as next week's battle. We start off with Columbus. So the same operation, and we'll end it with Anderson and Palmito Ranch. Columbus has got a claim as the actual last battle of the Civil War, but we'll get into that next week. So we'll start with the battles of Fort Blakeley. Like I said, it's finishing out the Spanish fort and the Mobile campaign. If you guys remember that, Major General Edward Canby's Union forces, which were the 16th and 18th Corps, 13th Corps, they moved along the eastern shore of Mobile Bay, forcing the Confederates back into their defenses. Union forces then concentrated on Spanish Fort, like I said, and nearby Fort Blakeley. By April 1st, Union forces had enveloped Spanish Fort, thereby releasing more troops to focus on Fort Blakeley.
look at that shit. That's nice. Well, the old Blue Coats built 3 rings of earthworks, reaching ever closer until nearly 1,000 yards from the Fort Blakeley front. The old rebel Brigadier General St. John R. Liddell, my pillow guy, with about 4,000 men, held out against the much larger Union force until Spanish Fort fell on the 8th of April in the Battle of Spanish Fort. Makes sense. This allowed Canby to concentrate 16,000 men for the attack on Fort Blakeley alone. Uh-oh.
Well, that final assault began April 9th, which is the same day that, right now, only a couple hours before this, actually, Lee surrendered, but nobody knows it yet. But
Right.
This is led by Brigadier General John Hawkins. Sheer numbers breached the Confederate earthworks, compelling the Confederates, including Liddell, to surrender in about 30 minutes after the assault began. Casualty figures are approximate, but an estimated 75 Confederate soldiers were killed, with over 2,800 captured. 150 Union troops were killed, 650 wounded during the siege and assault.
Uh-oh, here we go. The siege and capture of Fort Blakeley was basically the last combined force battle of the war. Look at that. Yet it is criticized by some, such as Ulysses S. Grant, as an ineffective contribution to a Union war effort due to Canby's lateness in engaging his troops. The battle was actually fought hours after Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox.
Yeah.
The battle is considered the last major battle of the Civil War, with the exception of the Battle of Columbus in Georgia.
So it's not considered
Right.
the last major battle.
This is fought just a few days later.
Yes, it is. African-American forces played a major role in this successful Union attack, with about 5,000 of them from the United States colored troops
Nice.
brought through Pensacola, Florida. 2 days later, the 2 nearby island batteries in the Blakeley River were abandoned. After this battle, Union forces were finally able to occupy the city of Mobile, Alabama, April 12, 1865.
Okay.
Site of this battle is now Historical Park,
beautiful.
which is Historic Blakeley State Park.
Beautiful.
American Battlefield Trust and its partners, including the Blakeley Foundation, have saved 126 acres of the battlefield through mid-2023.
Fantastic.
All right, so got Mobile, Alabama.
Well, there's that, boys. Moving on, Battle of Morrisville, also known as Battle of Morrisville Station. April 13th to the 15th, 1865, this battle was fought, and you guessed it, Chicago, Illinois. Morrisville, North Carolina. This is during the Carolinas campaign of the Civil War that Sherman was, he's just like trouncing. He just came from
Georgia.
Georgia?
From really
Right, Louisiana.
Tennessee,
yeah. And just came around town and just took everybody's shit
burned it down.
on his way to meet General Ulysses S. Grant.
Well, that was a plan, but didn't need to.
Didn't need to. It was the last official battle of the American Civil War between the armies of Major General William T. Sherman and Rebel General Joseph E. Johnston.
Yep, April 11th, 1865, at 1 o'clock in the morning, Joseph Johnston learned from an unofficial yet reliable dispatch that Robert E. Lee surrendered the remnants of his army near the courthouse in Virginia.
He's probably thinking, damn.
Yeah, it's about over. Well, prior to this, the last shred of hope for an independent and the victorious Confederate States of America rested on Johnston, united with his army with Lee's somewhere near the North Carolina-Virginia border. Well, unfortunately, Lee's surrender dashed these hopes.
Damn.
None.
It's crazy. However, even after official confirmation from Confederate Secretary of War John Breckinridge on the 12th of April, President Jefferson Davis remained unconvinced that Lee's surrender was the fatal blow to the Confederacy and the war effort. He ain't giving up what little power he has.
Okay, buddy.
Rather, Davis spouted these grand illusions of erasing a large, well-armed, well-fed field army comprised of recalled deserters and those who avoided conscription to continue the fight for Confederate independence.
They deserted and avoided conscription for a reason. They ain't coming to fight for you now.
That's not going to happen, boys. And you can't get none of the Army of Virginia because...
Well, they're all laid down their arms.
Yeah.
April 13th, during a military meeting in Greensboro, North Carolina, Johnston tried to dissuade Davis from his plan for renewed combat by arguing that the Union forces outnumbered the Confederates by 18 to 1.
It's true.
The Confederacy lacked the money, credit, and factories to purchase or produce more arms, and fighting would only further devastate the South without significantly harming the enemy.
Unless they somehow just bombarded D.C. and just nonstop, just march there.
Found a way in.
Right.
Doubt that. Meanwhile, at the Battle of Morrisville, we'll go back to that, General Judson Kilpatrick, commanding officer of the Union cavalry advance, he forced Confederate forces under the command of Generals Wade Hampton and Joseph Wheeler to withdraw in haste.
All right.
That ain't helping your cause there, Davis.
No, the old Confederates were frantically trying to transport the remaining supplies and wounded westward by rail toward the final Confederate encampment of Greensboro, North Carolina, which, unbeknownst to them, had fallen under attack by the 3rd North Carolina Mounted Infantry as part of Stoneman's raid. A Union General Kilpatrick used artillery on the heights overlooking Morrisville Station and cavalry charges to push the old Rebs out of the small village, leaving many needed supplies behind. That seems to be the biggest loss for them. The supply train.
The last 9 days, they lost
no rations.
The Army of North Virginia lost everything.
Everything, man. However, the trains were able to withdraw with wounded soldiers from the Battle of Bentonville and the Battle of Eversboro. Okay. And that's the end of this battle.
It is. And meanwhile, with the surrender at Appomattox, Johnston shifted his objective to procuring the best possible terms for surrender, as he argued. It would be the greatest of human crimes to continue the war.
Yeah, it would.
Luckily for Johnston, Davis agreed to open communications with General William T. Sherman. However, Davis still believed that victory was achievable despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Johnston received Sherman's reply on Easter Sunday morning and rode out to Greensboro to notify Davis. However, Davis had left without notifying Johnston.
Oh, geez.
The two men never enjoyed a cordial relationship, apparently.
Oh.
An annoyed Johnston decided to engage in negotiations with Sherman without Davis's authorization and suggested meeting on April 17th, which Sherman agreed to.
You might as well. You ain't got no leader.
Right.
As Sherman boarded his train in Raleigh to take him to Durham Station, which is modern-day Durham, North Carolina. He did that on the morning of April 17th. Sherman learned by a coded telegram from Federal Secretary of War Edwin Stanton that Abe Lincoln had been assassinated.
Done.
Despite the shocking news, Sherman continued with his plans to meet with Johnston. Sherman and Johnston had never met before, despite both serving in the old army. Both developed a mutual respect for one another during the Atlanta campaign, though. They're like, man.
I mean, you kind of have to, right?
Right.
Well, after exchanging pleasantries, the generals settled on the small Bennett farmstead to house their private meeting to negotiate the terms. As soon as they were in private, Sherman handed Johnston the telegraph announcing Lincoln's assassination. After hearing the news, Johnston told Sherman he believed the event was the greatest possible calamity to the South.
Right.
Which reaffirmed his goal of obtaining the best possible terms of surrender.
Right.
In these preliminary negotiations, Johnston played his trump card. He offered to negotiate the terms of the surrender of all the remaining armies in exchange for amnesty for Davis and his cabinet, which Johnston claimed he could receive Davis's authorization. He said, we'll surrender everything right now, but Davis has got to be free.
Sherman initially rejected this offer, as he not only promised Grant he would not deviate from the terms Grant offered Lee at Appomattox, but also because by agreeing to Johnston's terms, Sherman would recognize the Confederacy as a sovereign, independent nation and extend into civilian matters which transgressed the boundaries of Sherman's authority as a military commander. Yeah, you can't do that. The two parties agreed to meet the following day for further negotiations. It's like, all right, I can give you everything you want, but the Davis thing. Can't do that.
I don't have the authority. When Sherman returned to Raleigh, he learned that despite his order to the contrary, the news of Lincoln's assassination spread. Sherman encountered an angry mob of soldiers who demanded that Sherman refuse a Confederate surrender. These men were crazy with vengeance.
All right.
The town of Raleigh was almost burned to the ground, just like Columbia, South Carolina? Yeah, Columbia, South Carolina, during the night of April 17th to the 18th. Yet Sherman was able to maintain control of his army and their quest for revenge. They're like, fuck these guys, let's go kill them all now.
Right. While the Union Army of Tennessee was close to turning into a mob, the old rebel army of Tennessee was quickly crumbling as well. As news of the surrender negotiations spread, demoralization spread across all units of Johnston's army, which in turn spurned high numbers of desertions. Yeah, it's over. The Army of Tennessee was quickly becoming a skeleton army. Nothing left.
April 18th at noon, Johnston and Sherman met once again at the Bennett House. Johnston through Breckinridge, the Secretary of War, John Breckinridge. He obtained Davis's authorization to surrender the remaining Confederate armies, but wanted Sherman's explicit assurance for the protection of his soldiers' constitutional rights.
All right.
Sherman assured him that Lincoln's 1863 Amnesty Proclamation and the terms of the Appomattox surrender allowed for a full pardon of all Confederate soldiers from privates up to the commanding generals.
Nice. Sherman and Johnston eventually reached an agreement. Under this agreement, hostilities would be suspended pending approval of the agreement. Confederates' arms were to be deposited in the respective state arsenals and could only be used within that very state. And officers and men had to sign an agreement to cease all hostilities of war. Additionally, the President of the United States would recognize all southern state governments as long as their officers and legislators took an oath of allegiance. The federal court system would be reestablished in the southern states.
All right. Well, the president would also guarantee the personal, political, and property rights of the southern people and grant legal amnesty to all southerners, which implicitly included Davis and his cabinet.
Right. Basically, they're saying everything's going to stay the same. It's just you guys in the United States, man.
Right. And you guys have no power.
Right.
These terms were incredibly lenient to the Southerners and followed Sherman's policy of a hard war followed by soft terms.
Exactly.
Sherman did not want to punish the South, but rather welcome them back into the fold of the United States with open arms.
That's the only way you could do it if you want the Union to come together.
Yeah, that way he wanted to alleviate any resistance. Regardless his motivations, by offering these terms, Sherman delved into political matters which he had no authority over.
Couldn't do anything.
For this very reason, President Andrew Johnson and his cabinet rejected these April 18th terms and sent Grant to Raleigh to oversee the resumption of hostilities. He said, Sherman's getting a little too ahead of himself here.
Right. During the armistice, Johnston's skeleton army was further crumbling as mass desertions increased, which continued to plague this very army. Discipline collapsed, thievery ran rampant. Even Johnston's headquarters were robbed. Johnston and his subordinates barely had any control of the army. Thus, when a dispatch from Sherman arrived at 6 o'clock in the evening of the 24th of April, notifying him that hostilities would resume on the 25th at noon
26th.
sharp. On the 26th at noon sharp, Johnston knew he needed to act fast in order to procure favorable surrender terms for his quickly shrinking army.
He's like, no, man, I can't afford to be attacked.
No.
Well, at Johnston's request, he and Sherman met again at the Bennett Place April 26th without Grant. Under Johnston and Sherman's authority, General John Schofield, he drafted terms that closely resembled the Appomattox terms.
All right.
April 27th, Johnson wrote a codicil for these terms, which Schofield amended. President Johnson and his cabinet approved these terms and did not take issue with Johnson's supplement.
Okay.
Under these final terms, Johnson's army and his naval force would cease all hostilities.
Right.
Each brigade could keep 1/7 of its small arms,
Okay.
and soldiers would deposit their arms at their respective state capitals. All officers and men were to be paroled and take an oath to not take up arms against the United States.
Makes sense.
Their paroles would be signed by their immediate commanders. Soldiers could retain their horses and other private property, and the Union Army would provide field, rail, and water transportation home to paroled men.
Look at that shit.
Take your shit, get back home, and live your lives,
just
boys.
Just go. See, aren't we a loving government?
Right.
Separate from this agreement, Sherman also promised 250,000 rations to newly paroled troops. These favorable surrender terms allowed former Confederates to return home with relative ease. The surrender at Bennett Place was the largest surrender of the entire war, which included approximately 90,000 Confederates stationed in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. However, Bennett Place was not the last Confederate surrender. That occurred on the 23rd of June with General Stan Wade's Indian Territory troops.
Yep. However, this surrender illustrates the tensions between military and political leaders and represents the struggle to bring the former Confederates back into the Union fold while ensuring the prevention of any future hostilities. Due to the development of the area, hardly any evidence of the battle remains.
Wow.
Why would it not? Some heavily trampled breastwork is still visible in the woods by the train tracks.
Huh?
The North Carolina government has installed a sign marking the approximate location of this battle.
Fantastic.
Good for you guys. It's probably all overgrown and faded and fucking shot up knowing these fucking North Carolinians.
You'd be better off planting a plaque in your backyard and saying that's the battlefield.
Right.
So there's that. Johnston finally get what he wanted. Don't have to worry about dying. Just to go home. All right, moving on. Battle of West Point. This is in Georgia. Happened on 16th of April. Formed part of the Union campaign through Alabama and Georgia, known as Wilson's Raid. The rail junction of West Point was one of the 2 Chattahoochee River crossings, which General James H. Wilson planned to destroy after capturing Montgomery, Alabama. Dividing his army, he detailed Colonel Oscar Hugh LaGrange to attack West Point, while he himself moved downriver to instigate the Battle of Columbus. To take that important Confederate manufacturing center, he said, we need it. Oh, yeah, they really don't. War over.
After defeating Lieutenant General Nathan, officially Johnson hasn't surrendered here yet.
Right.
After defeating Lieutenant General Nathan Bedford Forrest's defenders at the Battle of Selma, April 2nd, and capturing Montgomery, April 12th, Brigadier General Wilson turned his raiders' attentions toward the Chattahoochee River to the east. He telegraphed Major General George Thomas. If I can now destroy arsenals and supplies at Columbus and divide their army in the southwest, they must disintegrate for lack of munitions.
Okay.
There is no force to resist me, and I see no reasonable ground for fearing failures. My command is in magnificent condition.
Beautiful.
This guy, he's fucking sure of himself, ain't he?
Yeah. The river was swollen by rains, which it usually has been in the past couple of months here. So capturing a bridge would be required to make swift progress. Wilson determined that either one of 2 locations with bridges would suit this purpose. The one at West Point or the more heavily defended one at Columbus. The 2 towns were only 35 miles apart, and Wilson divided his force to attack both in order to increase the chances of one being taken and attacked. So like if we can get at least one of them, right? Colonel Oscar Hugh LaGrange's brigade was detailed to attack West Point, as we said.
Yeah, West Point did not have mills or foundries, but it was a critical rail center. As a connecting point for 2 railroads of different gauges, West Point had an extensive rail yard with many locomotives and rail cars.
Oh, that's nice.
The railway bridges were commanded by Fort Tyler, which was a 35-yard square earthwork.
Oh, wow.
That's it. Upon a hill on the Alabama side of the river. It had walls 4.5 feet high, surrounded by a ditch 6 to 10 feet deep, and 7 to 12 feet across.
Damn.
The fort was equipped with 32-pounder siege gun and 2 12-pounder field pieces.
Beautiful.
That's a shitty fort.
Right. On the morning of 16th of April, LaGrange's brigade approached West Point. The brigade consisted of 2nd and 4th Indiana Cavalry, 1st Wisconsin Cavalry, the 7th Kentucky Cavalry, and the 18th Indiana Battery of Light Artillery. The cavalry troops were armed primarily with, you guessed it, those damn repeating rifles.
Cheaters!
Awaiting them at Fort Tyler was a small group of Rebs, somewhere between 120 and 265 men, under the command of Brigadier General Robert C. Tyler. In addition to the 3 main cannon, the convalescents and militia were armed with smoothbore muskets, so rocks.
Basically, they shoot fucking 2 feet before they fall. Skirmishing began at 10 a.m. as the fort's pickets were driven in. The Federal batteries set up a half a mile away on Ward's Hill and began shelling the redoubt, while cavalrymen dismounted to serve as skirmishers and invest the fort. Shelling continued until 1:30 p.m., when Lagrange arrived with the remainder of the brigade. The dismounted cavalry pressed the fort and exchanged fire with the defenders, closing within 50 yards and sniping out the defender artillerists.
Ooh.
Federals also removed long planks from nearby structures in preparation to span the ditch.
Damn right.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Beautiful. As the Federales sniped the old Reb artillerists attempting to man their pieces, Colonel Lagrange hoped to use the distraction to secure his primary objective, which was the bridge span, before it could be burned by the Rebs.
Yeah.
He led the 4th Indiana Cavalry on a mad dash for the bridge. Seeing this, the defenders in the fort turned their cannon to halt the fray. But as the cavalry approached the bridge, they soon exceeded the effective range of the cannon. An exploding shell from the 32-pounder did succeed in killing the colonel's horse, though. 2 pack animals, and resulting in the colonel being stunned and sprawled on the ground. Like, what the hell just happened?
Charging across the bridge, the riders encountered a gap where planks had been removed, but were able to spur their horses over and overcome the Confederate defenders on the east side of the Chattahoochee.
Okay.
Here they dispersed a small defensive force that had incendiaries for burning the structure.
All right.
With the defenders pinned inside their fort, federal artillery and sniper fire suppressed the counterfire of the defenders, who lacked protection from headlogs. As a result, many of the Confederate killed and wounded suffered head wounds, I would bet.
Oh.
Yeah, because their heads fucking there.
Right. Oh, well. The garrison commander's attention was drawn to fire from nearby structures, which Tyler had been urged to burn before the engagement.
Oh.
But he had spared it because he did not believe the owners could withstand the loss. Makes sense.
Well, at least good guy. He didn't want to burn down all these damn houses.
Right. Like, come on, man. It's
Once these houses, they're going
right.
to hide in them and shoot us, right?
Yeah. According to our participant, Tyler bravely exposed himself to examine the battlefield and was quickly shot dead by a sniper who was operating from a nearby cottage.
Damn.
See, you can't be nice.
Can't do that.
Shortly thereafter, his second in command, Captain Celestino Gonzalez, he was also murdered. And Colonel James Fannin assumed command. He's like, I don't
I give up.
want to.
To end the stalemate, the dismounted troopers crossed the ditch using their planks. Running low on ammo, some defenders threw rocks and there you go, and lit shells over the parapet. A cavalry bugle sounded a final charge as the Union soldiers stormed over the embankment, and the fort immediately surrendered.
Oh, wow.
Union casualties were 7 men killed, 29 wounded. Confederates' losses were 19 killed, 28 wounded, plus 218 captured.
Damn.
The death of Brigadier General Tyler is noted as the last Confederate general to die in a battle. The Confederates who died were buried in what is now known as Fort Tyler Cemetery in town on the east side of the river. It is believed, but not confirmed, that the Union dead were buried there as well. Mm-hmm. In addition, how do you not document this? In addition, at least 50 other unknown Civil War soldiers are interred there as well.
Damn, that sucks. Just think about that, how many unknown graves are out there, dude. So many family members laying in the ground where nobody knows where they're at.
Talking about from the war or just in general?
Yeah, and in general. And war.
Well, you gotta figure, how many times was it just mass graves? Just
right.
100 fucking guys just in one spot. Nobody even knows where they are.
Crazy. The rolling stock of the Montgomery and West Point Railroad, along with commissary stores, had been sent to West Point before Montgomery fell.
Oh, jeez.
Because of their narrow gauge, these trains trapped. After the fort surrendered, Federal cavalry took control of the town of West Point and the vital bridges over that very river. The raiders then proceeded to burn the entire rolling stock of the railroad. 19 to 20 locomotives, 340 to 350 cars. Before the cars were fired, some foodstuffs were removed and given to the mayor of West Point to feed the wounded of both sides, as well as destitute citizens.
Good.
The bridges were spared only briefly as Lagrange awaited word of attack on Columbus to know if they would be needed.
Guess what? They won't be.
No.
Because next week, I know this is going to be a short one, Civil next week, but I'm not cramming 6 battles into one episode. So.
Right.
We'll have the Battle of Columbus, which is the same time as this battle, which is the bigger battle, and then the nothing battle of Anderson, and the very last official battle, some say, of some people say, of Palmito Ranch in Texas, all the way down in Brownsville, which is on the border of Mexico.
All the way down
they're like
Texas.
Not even America. It's ridiculous. And then, yeah, guys, it's over with. War's done. Finito. Over.
Except for the Indians.
No. Yeah, that'll be then, and then I'm not sure. Maybe we'll take like a week break, come back after the new year with the Lincoln assassination before we start profiling all these generals, corporals, all the colonels, and all these guys. We're far from done with this podcast. It's been 2.5 years on battles. We'll spend another probably 2.5 years on people.
Yeah, and events.
Yeah, and events, yeah. So I got a lot more to come on this Civil War. Either way, we'll be back next week for the last 3 battles of this very long and bloody war. So we'll see you then. Battles of American Civil War. Well, we
Ding, ding.